Governor Christie, we had a number of reasons for being anxious to have you with us at this summit. Speaking for myself, I was looking for a name that had just as much redundancy as mine. Over the weekend, I took the opportunity to take a quick look at your record. And my bottom line statement is you have much to be proud of. You are a straight talker, but more than that, you combine it with being a very effective doer. You tackle the tough issues. You know how to reach across the aisle. And this combination of qualities is evident in just two of the examples I would take. The first is pension reform. Having bored people for decades with discussions of the entitlement programs, I speak with great respect for anyone who reforms pensions. He worked with both parties on this most difficult of issues. My second example is similar in that it's difficult. It involves investing in the next generation. But again, it demonstrates your ability to tackle and succeed with tough issues. Finally, I would like to make an admission. I have suffered with negative charisma all of my life. And when I see someone with positive charisma, like you, I envy them. But in your case, I'm going to make a preposterous request. Could you manage to share some of your charisma with me? You needn't answer immediately. I want you to think about it. There are a number of implications. So it's now my immense pleasure and privilege to introduce Governor Christie. Governor Christie, please.
Thank you. Well, Governor, welcome to the Foundation Fiscal Summit, and I always look forward to interviewing you. You've been on Face the Nation several times, and the part I always like is when I ask you a question, you seem to answer, which is becoming a rare thing these days, and one of the reasons that it's always fun to talk to you.
Thank you.
Let me just start off this way. You know, it was not so long ago people were talking about the New Jersey miracle. They were talking about a turnaround. We did have, of course, Sandy came along. But just last month, you were saying, when you think back on what's gone for nearly the last 5 years, the recovery we have made has been truly exceptional. You said it's not complete, but it's been exceptional. But now suddenly, the news is not so good about New Jersey. You're facing a shortfall in your budget of $807 million. Credit rating was recently downgraded again. There's concern the state will be unable to make its pension payments. You've got low job growth when compared to some other states. So I guess I'll just begin with a general question. Where do you start? Can you fix this, and can you do all of it at once, or where do you set your priorities from here on?
Well, you know, I think, as I said in those comments, I made it really clear that the comeback we've made has been exceptional but not complete. And the other thing that I've been talking about in parallel tracks is the fact that our entitlement spending, and at the state level, that's pension, health benefits, and debt service. In my fiscal year 15 budget, that takes 94 cents of every new dollar. So when you talk about wanting to invest in higher education or K-12 education, if you talk about wanting to invest in infrastructure, that all has to come out of that 6 cents, and it's not sustainable. So we've made some great strides on pension reform and on public health benefit reform, but I've been saying now for the last year and during the campaign in 2013 for re-election that we needed to do more. And I said the chickens are going to come home to roost. Now the only surprise in what you just stated is that it's happened so quickly. Now there's a whole bunch of reasons for that are technical in nature. Part of it in a state like ours that has such an income tax system that is so heavily stratified to the top taxpayers that when here in Washington they raised the taxes in 2012, lots of people accelerated their income, capital gains and others into that 2012 year to avoid the federal tax increase in 13. And our economists underestimated what the effect that would be on the 2013 tax year. And it was a big one. In the month of April alone in New Jersey, they overestimated our revenue by $650 million for the month of April. So, we got to deal with that problem. I'll come out next week with a plan on how to deal with it. But the long-term problem here is that in fiscal year 16, I'll give you one example, New Jersey will pay more for retiree health benefits than we'll pay for active employees. It's just not sustainable. And so I'm trying in the last 5 years to fix problems that we've accumulated over the last 20. Good news and bad news. The bad news is I have to try to do it, and it's never fun. But the good news is that we know it, and we're going to either choose to confront it or not, and that's where I'm going to have to deal with the Democratic legislature.
Well, why did they, what do you think the reasons were that they so overestimated what the revenue coming in was going to be?
Well, listen, I see in the audience an economist from my old high school, so I don't mean to insult economists, but the fact is that when I ask them, how could you be so wrong? Because it wasn't just my economist, by the way, it was also the legislature's economists. We agreed roughly within about $75 million of each other. So in a $33 billion budget, that's essentially a rounding error. They were all off by about $550 to $625 million. They said we just missed it. And the great thing about an economist is that's all they have to say. Right? They just look at me and go, "Oh, Governor, I'm sorry, we missed it." I'm like, yeah, I'm sure you are, but I'm the one who has to fix your miss. They just said they underestimated how much high-end taxpayers would accelerate capital gains, bonus income, and everything else. And we're a heavily Wall Street dependent state. We have a lot of people work on Wall Street who depend on the majority of their income coming from bonus payments. They underestimated how much that was accelerated into 12 to avoid the federal tax increases that were going to be effective in 13. And that's their explanation to me. That's a cold comfort to me, Bob, because now I have to fix it with 45 days left in my fiscal year. My fiscal year ends June 30th, so 85% of my spending is already done, and that money's out the door. So it's limited options, and it obviously has a rollover effect into fiscal 15. But unlike the federal government, we have a requirement for a balanced budget constitutionally, so I have to do what I have to do.
Well,
I'll do it.
That's my second question. I mean, can you do have to have a balanced budget.
Yep.
That's the law. Can you do that?
Yes.
And how?
Well, I'll tell you next week. I mean, Bob, it's just me and you talking in the back, I might tell you, but we got cameras here and press here. I want to have an announcement next week, and I'll make an announcement next week about how we fix it. We will fix it. And you know why? Because I have no choice. It's like...
But can you cut spending? I mean, where do you cut? Some people on your staff tell me there is no place to cut. You cut it as much as you can.
Well, I mean, listen, over the last 7 years now, if you compare the non-entitlement spending in our state, exclude debt service, pension payments, and health insurance payments, that spending is $2.2 billion lower in my fiscal 15 budget than it was in fiscal year 08. So we have 6,000 fewer employees on the state payroll than the day I started. So my staff is somewhat right when they say there's no place else to cut in the easy things or the things that are discretionary. Very little. Plus, remember, too, in our budget, at a $33 billion budget, $12 billion of it is court-mandated K-12 spending that I can't touch. So that takes $12 billion of $33 billion off the table right off the bat. So there are limited options, but I'll exercise executive authority in the limited options and do what I need to do. But it is the bigger issue is how do we avoid this in the future? And the only way is to stop the insanity of a defined benefit pension system that we cannot afford, and of a health benefit system that Obamacare calls a Cadillac plan. You know, and it's embarrassing how rich this plan is, and we can't afford it any longer. And we're now paying 51% starting next fiscal year of our health care for retirees, not for active employees. You know, you don't need to be a genius to figure out that that's not sustainable.
You talk about the pension. You have a $1.6 billion payment coming up later this year on your
Yes, I
pension
do,
plan.
Bob. Yeah.
Are you going to be able to meet that? Will you delay
Bob keeps
it?
asking me these questions like as if I'm actually going to answer them. You're ruining my reputation. Next week, Bob, next week I'm going to answer what we're going to do. But here's the problem. The problem is, of that $1.6 billion, only roughly about $650 million of it is for the current pension bill for this year. $1 billion of it is for the unaccrued liability that my predecessors didn't pay for increased benefits. And when they, listen, for a decade, New Jersey governors made no pension payments. Christie Whitman, Jim McGreevey, Dick Cody, John Corzine made no pension payments. None. Zero. So you develop an unaccrued liability. And so my job is not only to pay for what I'm accumulating now, but also to pay back what they never paid. And so, you know, that $1.6 billion is divided up that way, about $650 million or so on current liabilities and about $1 billion on unaccrued liabilities. But what I'll tell you is in my 4 years, I've paid more into the pension system than the last 5 governors combined. So we're being responsible about this, and we'll be responsible about that payment. But I can't tell you exactly how I'm going to fix this until next week.
Well, I want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
As you might say. Will you raise taxes?
No.
You're not going to raise
Well, here's
taxes.
the thing, right? Understand how bad New Jersey's income tax system is. I'll give you this statistic. The top 10 income tax payers, I'm talking about 10 people, the top 10 income tax payers in New Jersey pay more than the bottom 2 million filers. So now what the legislature will come back to me with, invariably in the next 6 weeks, will be they want to raise taxes on millionaires by 1.75 Now this is, of course, particular New Jersey math, because our millionaires tax starts at $400,000. So what I say to people who may not want to come to New Jersey is, no. Come to New Jersey. You may not make $1 million, but we'll make you feel like you make $1 million. The 400,000 New Jersey, you can be a millionaire. Can't do that in most other states. But this is like, so what happens, Bob, if those 10 people get up and walk out? We're only talking about 10, not 10%, 10. They get up and decide to go and hang with Rick Scott in Florida. I'm losing the equivalent in revenue to what the bottom 2 million filers pay. That's why I'm not raising taxes. That's like saying you own a restaurant and you're not making enough money and you say to your partner, listen, nobody's coming here anymore. We need to make more money. Let's raise our prices. Well, you know, I don't think that's the way you get more people to come to your restaurant, is to raise your prices. And we're in competition with 49 other restaurants. We've got to make New Jersey more competitive. And in this situation, the best we can do is not make it less competitive.
Let me ask you about people at the other end of the income scale, and that is minimum wage people. What's your feeling about raising the minimum wage?
I proposed raising the minimum wage in New Jersey over 3 years and graduated in. We just talked about the economic difficulties that we're having in our state in some respects. And my view was that we didn't want to raise the minimum wage $1.25 in one fell swoop. And so when the legislature proposed that, I proposed, I'll give you $1.25 increase, but let's phase it in over 3 years. They rejected that and then put the $1.25 increase on the ballot as a constitutional amendment. And the voters passed it. So now the minimum wage has been increased in New Jersey, and we actually have a dollar amount minimum wage in our Constitution. I am sure that the framers of our state Constitution are rolling over in their grave that we're actually doing that, but that's what the Democrats in the legislature decided to do to avoid the veto pen. But my view is, absolutely we should be raising minimum wage, but we need to do it in a responsible, graduated way so that businesses can prepare for the impact and that it doesn't have a negative impact on employment. And so that's my position. It's the position I took in New Jersey, and I was overridden by the legislature and the voters on that. And they voted to raise it $1.25, so that's the minimum wage in New Jersey now. So I favor raising the minimum wage, but in a graduated, responsible way so that business has time to adjust.
What do you think the whole question of the minimum wage, what the impact of that will be on national politics? I mean, obviously President Obama wants to do it, but now we're hearing people like Mitt Romney saying maybe it's a good idea, Rick Santorum saying it's a good idea. Do you expect the Republican Party nationally will come out for raising the minimum wage? Would that be good politics?
Well,
for Republicans?
There's always a question about, I've always thought that good policy is good politics. But you have to explain yourself. I opposed a minimum wage increase in one fell swoop, proposed it in 3 steps, and won 61% of the vote at the same time that the ballot question was getting about the same amount. I think that what our party needs to be focused on is explaining ourselves and not appearing to be intolerant. There's lots of different ways to be able to have political success in this country. I don't think you do it by not letting people know what you really believe. You can't be afraid of what you believe. You need to tell people what you believe, but you also have an obligation to explain it in a way that people can understand it. And so my Democratic opponent tried to say in the election, he's against the minimum wage. And I had to look into the camera and say, now, you all know that's not true. They're in favor of it in 1 year, I'm in favor of it in 3 years. That's the difference. So I don't know what good politics will be, but I think good policy is creating jobs in this country and not hurting the job market. And I believe that making those type of extreme moves in one fell swoop is not good for the economy. And I think the Republican Party should stand for what's good for creating jobs. And that's only one thing. And we also shouldn't allow ourselves to be myopically focused on the minimum wage. Because I'll tell you this, I don't think there's a bunch of people out here in the audience or in the country who are sitting here, Bob, and saying to themselves, what I really hope for my children is that the minimum wage gets increased so they can earn a higher minimum wage. The problem we have in this country is not income inequality, it's opportunity inequality. And no matter where you are in the economic strata, you want greater opportunity for your children. And I don't believe raising the minimum wage creates greater opportunity. We need to do other things like tax reform and entitlement reform in this country to create opportunity for people to have a greater life than their parents have had. That's what I'm for. And where the minimum wage plays in that is it's a small element that should be done responsibly. But unfortunately in Washington, that's now become, everybody's focused on that. That's the holy grail. And the minute they do that, there'll be another holy grail that someone will be focused on that will be this big. And while they ignore the other bigger problems that are going on in our country.
I'm going to ask you about Bridgegate. You have said that you had no knowledge of any of this, and so far there is no evidence.
It's a prop, obviously.
No evidence to suggest that you did, but these investigations are still going on. Yesterday on a radio program, the Ask the Governor program, you got a lot of questions about it again. Do you think that is going to have an impact on your being able to meet these budget challenges with the legislature? And what do you think the impact has been on your political future?
Well, no, it won't have any impact upon the budget problems because we have a constitutional requirement to fix them. Mm-hmm. So if the legislature, because they're holding hearings on something, want to waive the constitutional requirement on a balanced budget, that'll be an interesting trick. So I don't think, and as far as the impact on my political future, I think it will have none because I didn't do anything. So listen, I understand the circus that this becomes. You get 61% of the vote in a blue state in November, and then all of a sudden, a couple of staff people do something that they shouldn't have done. I fire them, and all of a sudden this becomes the biggest story in the country for a couple of months. Because I guess you guys weren't doing anything else down here, so this is what needed to be focused on, right? In the end, what the people of New Jersey know about me is I tell them the truth. I told them I had nothing to do with it, and now you've had all kinds of people looking at this for nearly 4.5 months now, and there hasn't been one suggestion that I knew anything about it. I am not the first chief executive. I see Governor Engler down here. I saw President Clinton backstage before. I'm not the first chief executive who had someone on their staff do something they didn't know something about that they disapproved of and later had to fire them. I don't think that hurt anybody's career, and it's not going to hurt mine. I mean, my future is going to be based upon the record that Mr. Peterson talked about and how people in the state feel about me. And if I decide to do something more, it's going to be how the people in the country feel about me. But I think this will be a footnote by the time any of those decisions need to be made.
Are you still thinking about running for president, and when will you make a decision on that?
Yes, and later.
Later. You said something very interesting yesterday on that radio program I talked about. You said you like Jeb Bush a lot.
Yeah.
And you said if he decided to run and you ran, that would be stressful for you.
I responded to the question. He said, the interviewer asked, if Jeb Bush ran and you ran, would that be stressful or no problem? So I was given a choice between two, and given the malady I suffer from that you mentioned, I actually answered the question. I probably should have said neither. Let me tell you what it'd be about, but I don't do that. So yeah. I said, well, between the two, it would be stressful because I like Jeb, I respect him, I consider him a friend. I consider President Bush 43 a friend. And you don't like to run against people who are your friends. You'd rather run against people you don't like. It's easier. All right? So it would be stressful, but it won't determine my decision. And I suspect it wouldn't determine his either. We have to make our own independent decisions about whether to run for president or not. But the only positive about it would be I know I'd have fun with Jeb on the campaign trail. We believe in a lot of the same things. I think we're very similar in terms of our approach to solving problems. And I also think he's one of the nicest people I've had the chance to meet in public life. So, he's a good guy, and I like him.
So who do you not like on the Republican field?
Well, we'll have to see who runs first, Bob. I don't want to tell someone I don't like him, then they turn out not to run. Oh, yeah. That would be a wasted unlike, wouldn't it? So, how about we make a deal? Like when they announce, so you can ask me, do you like him or don't you? Do you like her or don't you? Then I'll tell you. No problem. But so far, nobody's declared. So.
Let's talk about a little election coming up this year,
yep.
The midterm elections. There's considerable, among the pundits at least, that the Republicans actually have a chance to take the Senate. Mm-hmm. What do you think the impact of that would be, and what would be the impact on the president?
Well, listen, I think it would present the president with an extraordinary opportunity. He can decide what the last 2 years of his presidency are going to be like. Because I think on issues of trade and tax reform, that the president could find areas of compromise with Republicans more than he finds them with Senate Democrats.
Really?
Absolutely. I think a Republican Senate and a Republican House would give fast-track authority to the president because they believe in free trade. And I think there's lots of Democrats in the Senate who don't believe in free trade. And so they've been much more resistant to give the president that authority. I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that a deal could be worked out there. I suspect there could be a deal worked out on meaningful tax reform if he had partners there that were willing to work with him. And I think Republicans, if they took over the House and the Senate, would be tested as well. Are they now, since they have a greater lever of power, would they be willing to actually work with the president to do things that could be consistent with goals that the country needs? So I actually think if you want a more productive final 2 years of the Obama presidency, the argument is for a Republican House and Senate. And you've seen that work before. You saw President Clinton do that before with a Republican House and Senate and produce a lot of things with Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole during that period of time. And so I think that can be done. I think it would be positive for the country. And I think it would end the kind of gridlock that you have right now on certain very important issues for the country's economic future.
Well, that was my next question. Basically, the Congress has announced they're not going to do anything for the rest of the year. They announced last month, and so far they're holding to that. I commented on television, it's the earliest start on doing nothing we've had around here in a long time. What do you think is, when you get right down to the bottom of it, why has Washington become so unable to get anything done anymore, because I see now sometimes when there are things that both sides want to get done, they can still figure out a way not to do it. Something happens that gums it up. What advice would you have to either side, the Republicans or the president, to break this and get things going again?
Well, listen, I can only analogize it to my experience in New Jersey, and I've had a Democratic legislature my entire time, and not by a small amount. 24-16 in the Senate, 48-32 in the lower house. So it's not like I pick a vote off here or there and I'm okay. I'm working with Democratic leaders of the legislature on everything that we have to get done. I think the first thing is that nobody has relationships in this town anymore. Every time the Democratic Senate president is in the Statehouse and I'm there, we meet. Every time. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. He comes in and we chat about the games the night before or the gossip around the Statehouse or whatever is going on. And do you have anything? No, I don't have anything. I don't have anything. Okay, and he leaves. Sometimes it's hour or 2 hour meetings about substance. Sometimes it's 2 hour meetings that devolve into dinner. But what happens is we get to know each other and we get to trust each other because we're both good people. Right? We disagree on lots of stuff, but we're good people at core. And when you sit and spend that much time with someone, you get to learn that, or not. And luckily in my case, I've learned that he is a really good person. And what that then leads to is when he gives me his word on something, I can count on it. And when I give him my word, he knows he can count on it. That's the only way business gets done in politics. If you don't know each other, you don't trust each other. If you don't trust each other, you can't make deals. If you can't make deals, you can't get anything done. That's it. And I don't think this is a president who's ever been interested in having those relationships with either party. I mean, I just don't see any objective evidence that the president wants to have those relationships with members of Congress, because it's hard. Believe me, there are times I meet with some folks in the legislature that I'd rather have a root canal. All right? I mean, seriously, there's some people I have to deal with that I don't like. But it's my job. If I don't deal with them, they'll ignore me, I'll ignore them, and we'll get nothing done. So I think that the problem starts with the president, because he's the president. If you're waiting for leadership out of Congress, you're going to be waiting forever. All right? And that's both parties. The fact is the executive has to lead. And sometimes that means you have to do things you don't want to do. And sometimes that means you have to spend time on things you'd rather not spend time on. But that's the only way you develop relationships, and they don't have it. And that's why it hasn't worked.
Governor Chris Christie, you answered the question.
All right.
Thank you.
Most
of them.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.